Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to take you inside one of the most guarded and controversial places in the American justice system. Polunsky Unit, a maximum security prison in Texas that houses the state's death row. Located in Livingston, Texas, Polunsky is not just a prison. It is a place where time stands still. For the men held here, life is defined by isolation, routine, and the constant presence of death. Most death row inmates spend 22 to 24 hours a day alone in their cells, with minimal human contact and limited access to programs or recreation. The cells are small, silent, and controlled. Conversations happen through steel doors. Meals arrive through narrow slots. For many, the most meaningful interaction they experience is a brief exchange with a guard or a distant voice during legal visits. Years, sometimes decades, pass this way. Mental health is one of the most serious realities inside Polunsky. Prolonged solitary confinement has been shown to cause anxiety, depression, hallucinations, and emotional breakdown. For inmates awaiting execution, the psychological weight of knowing their sentence is final adds another layer of suffering. Executions in Texas are carried out by lethal injection, and Polunsky plays a central role in this process. Inmates are transferred from death row to the execution chamber in nearby Huntsville when their date arrives. Until that moment, they live in a space between life and death, often pursuing last appeals, spiritual reflection, or reconciliation with their past. Supporters of the death penalty argue that Polunsky represents justice for the most severe crimes. Critics argue it exposes deep flaws in the system, including racial disparities, wrongful convictions, and ethical concerns about capital punishment. The Polunsky Unit, officially known as the Allen B. Polunsky Unit, serves as the central facility for housing male death row inmates in the state of Texas, making it one of the most significant prisons in the U.S. capital punishment system. Located in Livingston, Texas, the prison operates under the Texas Department of Criminal Justice and is designed to hold individuals convicted of the most serious crimes, including capital murder. Unlike other correctional facilities that focus on rehabilitation or inmate programs, Polunsky's primary function is containment and security, reflecting the finality of the sentences carried by those inside. All men sentenced to death in Texas are transferred to Polunsky, where they remain throughout the appeals process, which can last for decades. The prison is built with extreme security measures, including reinforced housing units, constant surveillance, and restricted movement, emphasizing control over daily life. Polunsky's role extends beyond incarceration, as it represents the final stage of the justice system for condemned inmates, placing it at the center of legal, moral, and political debates surrounding the death penalty in Texas. Life on death row at the Polunsky Unit is defined by extreme isolation, making solitary confinement one of its most dominant and controversial features. Inmates are typically confined to small, single-person cells for 22 to 24 hours a day, with very limited opportunities to leave. These cells are designed for control rather than comfort, often containing only a bed, a toilet, and a small writing surface, all within a tightly enclosed space. Human interaction is minimal and highly regulated, usually limited to brief encounters with correctional officers during meal delivery or security checks. Recreation, when allowed, often occurs alone in small, enclosed areas rather than open yards, reinforcing the sense of separation. Visits with family, attorneys, or spiritual advisors take place behind thick glass or through secure communication systems, removing physical contact entirely. Over time, this prolonged isolation reshapes an inmate's perception of time, space, and reality, creating an environment where days blend together and silence becomes overwhelming. The structure of death row at Polunsky ensures that isolation is not temporary, but a permanent condition, lasting for years or even decades while inmates wait for appeals, legal decisions, or execution dates. For many inmates at the Polunsky Unit, death row is not a short or defined chapter, but a long-term existence that can stretch across decades. After receiving a death sentence, Individuals are transferred to Polunsky, where they remain while navigating a complex and lengthy appeals process involving state and federal courts. These legal procedures are slow and highly technical, often taking years to move forward due to case backlogs, new evidence, or changes in law. During this time, inmates live in a constant state of uncertainty, never knowing if an appeal will succeed, be denied, or delayed indefinitely. Some prisoners grow old on death row, experiencing declining physical health while still confined to the same restrictive conditions they entered years earlier. Relationships with family members change or fade as time passes, and many inmates outlive parents, spouses, or close relatives while still awaiting a final legal outcome. The prolonged nature of confinement turns death row into a place of suspended time, where punishment is not only the sentence itself, but the endless waiting under the shadow of execution. Prolonged solitary confinement on death row at the Polunsky unit has profound and damaging effects on inmates' mental health, making psychological suffering a central reality of life inside the prison. Extended isolation deprives individuals of normal social interaction, sensory stimulation, and meaningful activity, all of which are essential for mental stability. Over time, many inmates develop symptoms such as chronic anxiety, deep depression, paranoia, and extreme mood swings. Hallucinations, difficulty concentrating, memory loss, and distorted perceptions of reality are also commonly reported among those held in long-term isolation. The constant silence, interrupted only by mechanical noises or distant voices, can intensify feelings of loneliness and hopelessness. For inmates already struggling with mental illness, solitary confinement often worsens existing conditions, while others develop psychological disorders as a direct result of their confinement. The added pressure of living under a death sentence, knowing execution is a possible outcome, magnifies stress and fear, creating an environment where mental health deterioration becomes almost unavoidable. Daily life on death row at the Polunsky unit is shaped by an extreme lack of meaningful human contact, making social isolation a constant and inescapable condition. Most interactions inmates experience are brief, formal, and controlled, often limited to correctional officers delivering meals through a slot in the cell door or conducting security checks without conversation. Face-to-face communication with other inmates is nearly non-existent, as prisoners are housed separately and movement is carefully restricted. Visits from family members, when permitted, take place through thick glass using phones or intercom systems, eliminating physical contact and emotional closeness. Legal visits follow similar procedures, focused strictly on case matters rather than personal connection. Over time, the absence of normal social interaction erodes communication skills, emotional expression, and a sense of belonging. Simple human experiences such as shared conversations, physical touch, or spontaneous interaction become distant memories, reinforcing a daily reality where isolation is not just a condition of confinement, but the defining feature of existence. Executions for inmates housed at the Polunsky unit are not carried out within the prison itself, but take place at the Huntsville unit, located approximately 45 miles away, which serves as the official execution site for the state of Texas. When an execution date is set and all appeals are exhausted, an inmate is transferred from Polunsky to Huntsville in the final days or hours before the scheduled procedure. This transfer marks a critical shift from years of waiting to the immediate reality of execution. The method used is lethal injection, a process involving a series of drugs intended to sedate, paralyze, and ultimately stop the heart. Leading up to the execution, inmates are typically allowed final visits with family members, legal counsel, and spiritual advisors, all under strict supervision. The knowledge that execution is approaching transforms the psychological atmosphere of death row, not only for the condemned inmate, but also for prison staff and other prisoners who are aware of the process. Polunsky's role in this system places it directly within the machinery of capital punishment, serving as the holding ground where inmates live for years knowing that transfer to Huntsville signifies the end of their sentence and their life under the authority of the state. For inmates on death row at the Polunsky unit, the legal appeals process becomes the central focus of their existence, shaping both daily life and long-term outlook. After sentencing, prisoners enter a complex system of state and federal appeals that can involve multiple courts, attorneys, and years of legal review. Each appeal offers a possibility of sentence reduction, retrial, or exoneration, but also carries the risk of denial, which brings the inmate closer to execution. The slow pace of the legal system creates prolonged uncertainty, where months or years can pass with no clear progress or resolution. Inmates often rely heavily on attorneys and legal correspondence as their primary connection to hope, spending countless hours reviewing documents, writing letters, and waiting for court decisions. Sudden changes in case status, such as denied appeals or newly scheduled execution dates, can cause intense emotional stress and anxiety. This constant fluctuation between hope and despair defines life on death row, as inmates live with the knowledge that their future depends not on their daily actions, but on distant legal rulings that remain beyond their control. The existence of death row at the Polunsky unit places the prison at the center of ongoing ethical and moral debates surrounding capital punishment in the United States. Supporters of the death penalty argue that it serves as a form of justice for the most severe crimes, offering closure to victims' families and acting as a deterrent against extreme violence. They view facilities like Polunsky as necessary institutions that enforce accountability when other punishments are considered insufficient. On the other hand, critics question whether the state should have the authority to take a human life under any circumstances, especially given the irreversible nature of execution. Concerns about wrongful convictions, racial and socioeconomic disparities, and inconsistent sentencing practices fuel arguments that the system is deeply flawed. The conditions on death row, including long-term isolation and psychological suffering, raise further questions about whether such treatment aligns with human rights standards and constitutional protections against cruel punishment. Polunsky becomes more than a prison in this debate. It stands as a physical symbol of society's struggle to balance justice, punishment, morality, and the value of human life. The existence of the Polunsky unit and the reality of death row compel society to confront difficult questions about the nature of justice, the purpose of punishment, and the limits of human compassion. Observing the conditions faced by inmates, prolonged isolation, restricted movement, limited human contact, and the looming certainty of execution, forces a reflection on whether the criminal justice system prioritizes retribution over rehabilitation or humane treatment. Polunsky serves as a stark reminder of the profound power the state holds over life and death, raising ethical concerns about accountability, fairness, and the potential for error. Beyond legal and procedural considerations, the prison challenges moral perspectives. How much suffering is justifiable in the name of punishment, and what responsibilities do we, as a society, bear for individuals we condemn? The daily reality of living under such extreme confinement, coupled with the psychological and emotional toll it imposes, makes it impossible to ignore the human cost of the death penalty. Polunsky thus becomes more than a detention facility. It is a mirror reflecting broader societal values, compelling citizens, policymakers, and advocates to wrestle with complex questions about morality, justice, and the balance between law and humanity. In the end, Polunsky Prison is not just a place where sentences are carried out, but a place that reveals the deepest tensions within the justice system itself. Behind its walls are human beings living in extreme isolation, shaped by years of waiting, uncertainty, and psychological strain. Whether one views the death penalty as justice or injustice, the reality of death row at Polunsky cannot be ignored or simplified. It challenges us to look beyond crime statistics and legal outcomes and consider the human cost of capital punishment. As society continues to debate the future of the death penalty, Polunsky stands as a powerful reminder that how justice is enforced matters just as much as the verdict itself.